Hi everyone, I am Warapon Sharunin. Good day to Dr. Ehsan and my fellow classmates. Today, I would like to share my critical analysis work entitled Identity, Colonial Mentality, and Decolonizing the Mind in exploring narrative and examining mental health implication for Filipino Americans by Ashley Mika Decina, 2014. This is a project based upon an independent investigation submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements of her degree of Master for Social Work. Firstly, this is my presentation outline. Introduce the background of the research subject in order for us to understand the study better. Filipino Americans is the research subject. The researcher has described them physically, socially, and politically. Let's get to know their background. Filipino American is the second largest Asian group in the United States. They are also the second fastest growing Asian Pacific Island community, and they are currently 3.4 million Filipinos in the United States. 1.7 million of whom are foreign-born, making them the third largest American immigrant group next to Mexican and Chinese. Stereotypes such as the invisible minority and the forgotten Asian Americans are imprinted upon this population. In the United States, Filipinos are often referred to as the little brown brother. All of these labels have negative, inferiorizing connotation. Politically, in the United States, Filipinos are underrepresented. Filipinos were the first Asian on United States soil when they landed a slave in 1587 from Spanish galleon ships. One of the first Asian settlements was in New Orleans, where a group of Filipinos who escaped Spanish galleon ship came in 1763. Since the Philippines was considered U.S. territory, Filipinos were able to enter the United States easily, and they settled in largely western states including California, Hawaii, Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. Next, we are going to look at the issues faced by Filipino American which led to this study. These extracts were taken from the master thesis, and I have categorized them into 6 major issues. Let's have a look at the first issue, learned phenomenon. American Filipinos were not born with an instinct to privilege whiteness. This was a learned phenomenon. Next is white supremacy. Hagenden, 1994, shared that he, as an American Filipino, was taught to look outside the indigenous culture for inspiration. He was also taught that the label made in the USA mean automatic superiority. The third issue is racism. The Jesus in 2005 revealed that his 4th grade classmate has mocked and taunting him as the Oriental coffee bean. Next is the sense of lost history. The Jesus 2005 also disclosed that his parents telling him that Filipinos had no culture before the Spanish came. Strobel in 2005 spoke about her story on becoming a split Filipino subject and talked about Filipinos trying to connect with an innocent of indigenous self. Last but not least, Revealer spilled that the standards of appearance is also having roots in colonization, with Filipinos trying to stay out of the sun so as not to get too dark and pinching the nose to make it less flat. Next, I'm going to share the overview of my selected article. Identity, Colonial Mentality, and Decolonizing the Mind, Exploring Narrative and Examining Mental Health Implications for Filipino American, a master thesis by Ashley Mika Decina, 2014, has been accepted for inclusion in thesis, dissertation, and project by an authorized administrator of Smith Scholar work, thus position itself firmly within the field of social and behavioral science. The title itself suggests the relationship between Filipino-American perception, colonial and decolonial mentality, and its impact on their mental health. This thesis is divided into 5 parts. The article introduction parts begin with a short historical overview on the Philippines' extensive history of colonization 400 years long, first by Spain, starting in 1521, and subsequently by the United States in 1898, up until the mid-20th century, with this long history of colonization and encourage and cultural parallelism in Filipino history. This research paper is an empirical qualitative study. Post-colonial theory acts as a theoretical foundation for this study. The study finding revealed that both colonial mentality and decolonizing the mind were true experiences for the majority of participants. Lastly, the mental health implications were drawn. This study is aimed to examine Filipino-American identity, mental health, and how this perception of identity were related to colonial mentality and decolonizing the mind. To do this, the researcher first explored whether colonial mentality resonated with Filipino-American who were born and raised in the United States. Based on my reading, I have summarized colonial mentality into 3 main categories. First, in terms of perception. The perceptions of ethnic and cultural inferiority is a form of internalized oppression. Next, the characteristic of colonial mentality is cultural imposition of the dominant group on the minority groups and cultural disintegrations of the oppressed group, indigenous group. Thirdly, the behavior portrayed by those with colonial mentality is in valuing the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of the dominant or colonizing culture over one indigenous culture. The readers were curious to find out the existence of colonial mentality among American Filipino. So, studies have been done inquiring whether colonial mentality is present in Filipino-American population, and the results from various researchers and studies shows that colonial mentalities is exhibited by Filipino Americans. Next, in order to understand this study better, the researcher has provided explanation on how to differentiate between classical colonialism and internal colonialism. Classical colonialism is colonized in the physical sense in the Philippines, which has happened over 50 years ago. In other words, classical colonialism has ended, and many second-generation Filipino Americans did not directly experience this colonialism, but may experience a term called internal colonialism. Internal colonialism is characterized by a society with racial inequalities and the cultural impositions of the dominant group on the minority groups, and cultural disintegrations of the oppressed group, indigenous culture. The definitions of the ideas of decolonizing the mind is a process of reconnecting with the past to understand the present, and it strengthens the cultural connection to the Filipino indigenous culture as a source of grounding, and it can be exhibited in a variety of ways. while for the action, the fight of national independence and decolonization in a physical sense in the Philippines happened over 50 years ago. The strategies are the importance of cultivating an ethnic sense of self as one strategy of many to resist dominant structures, and the stabilizations of an ethnic identity is a healing and transformative act in response to a people who have been deeply violated. Mental health implication. Firstly, colonial mentality. Research has demonstrated that colonial mentality affects mental health in a negative way. Internalized oppression. Oppressed population who as a result have suffered negative psychological and mental health consequences. Insidious traumas. Insidious traumas called history on contemporary Filipino Americans, although they are generation removed from the original traumas. Next implication is indirect implication. Root 1997 declared how, despite not being directly affected, a trauma has taken place, and Filipinos are feeling its very real effect years later. Next is suicidal ideation. 45.6% of Filipino American adolescents exhibit suicidal ideation and one of the highest rate of teen suicide ideation and attempts. Lastly, depression. One experienced depression in some form was 27% higher than the average population in the United States, which hover between 10% and 20%. Next, I would like to comment on the study research structure, strengths, and weaknesses. First, I found that the abstract organization could be clearer and concise. The researcher could include problem statement in it, as well as simplify the lengthy sentences by clearly listing out the research objective. For the introduction part, the topics included are relevant, and in-depth introduction of research subject is given in order for the readers to understand the history and background of Filipino Americans. However, the introduction write-up is lack of organization in terms of the whole introduction is a lengthy continuous write-up, and it could be improved by having subheadings in between the text to aid reading. I'm delighted as detailed definition, explanation, examples from various scholars are provided in the literature review, and it really helped me to understand all the construct of the research well without have to refer to other sources. Besides, empirical qualitative research design provide a better and deeper understanding of the fuller picture that can enhance understanding of the complex relationship between colonial mentality, the idea of decolonizing the mind, identity, and mental health implication. It is a fruitful reading as I have gained new insights on methodology parts. I am astonished by the systematic sample recruitment strategies, where I have learned about recruitment pool and the details that should be included in consent form before begin with an interview. The researcher not only include the details of purpose of the study, but also have listed out the possible risks and what to expect of the study. The participant was made aware that they have the right to refuse to answer any questions or withdraw at any time without consequence. Furthermore, I also love the research data collection parts as it is systematic and are following procedural guidelines. The researcher has included and taken into account the confidential parts by giving out the informed consent form earlier, and the interview transcription are kept with password and in protected document, and the interview data will be destroyed after 4 months periods. The findings and discussion parts has provided valuable insights for multicultural and multilingual readers. It's relevant and relatable to Malaysian contexts, as Malaysia does share the same extensive history of colonization. Malaysia has been colonized by 3 European powers and 1 Asian for 446 years long. Last but not least, I personally feel that the conclusion parts could be enhanced if the researcher could recap the overview of the study. The first implication is the identity crisis faced by Filipino Americans. Biculturalism could be identified when 4 participants felt that they were trying to incorporate 2 different cultures into their reality and so were navigating biculturalism. One participant noted that I'm learning to embrace this kind of gray where I know I'm not quite like my parents, but I know I'm not quite like an American peers as well. One way that colonial mentality manifested for people was identifying feelings, including inferiority, discomfort, shame, confusion. One participant says, I was kind of ashamed to tell people what my heritage is and what my ethnicity is. Another participant also described that he would feel embarrassed to have his parents speak Tagalog at his school. One participant revealed that he felt discomfort with his or her own culture and being who they are. Cultural dilution happens when Filipino Americans are rejecting Filipino culture. The researcher herself revealed that she was glad that she did not have a Filipino accent and she judged others who did. And the strong Filipino food smell in her grandma's house was embarrassing for her, especially when her white friends visit. The level of self-awareness is part of the decolonizing process, including knowing why one have lower self-esteem or identifying feelings of inferiority connected to colonial mentality and breaking those down. A few participants felt that self-esteem, depression, and suicidal ideation are mental health issues in which colonial mentality was intertwined. Last but not least is language shift. We could sense that Filipino American are avoidant in using their mother tongue, as most of the participants have shifted to English language. Last but not least, I'm going to share the significance of this study from my point of view as an ESL language teacher. Firstly, we should encourage our language learners to embrace self-acceptance and foster a sense of cultural pride. Besides, we could also spread mental health awareness and foster a growth mindset in both during English lessons or outside the classroom. We should also inculcate open-mindedness toward language learning, especially English language learning, by promoting bilingualism and multilingualism in Malaysia, aligned with MBI policy. The policy of the Ministry of Education Malaysia to ensure the usage of Malay language as a medium of communication in all national school and secondary schools, and to ensure that each Malaysian child can master both Malay and English language well and fluently. Furthermore, we could also integrate multicultural values in lesson in order to promote unity and embrace diversity among Malaysians. Lastly, we could also inculcate a sense of gratitude and appreciation of one's natural beauty regardless of their skin tone and features. That's all from me. Thank you for listening.